Before I introduce our last speaker, I wanted to highlight one of our speakers, Dr. James Martin, because of a bronchial infection, has been unable to come. But he asked that a chapter from his upcoming book be distributed here. It's called "The Joker in the Pack," and it is about the relationship between cyber world and nuclear weapons. And it is a very, very powerful, simple, short presentation of the incompatibility of nuclear weapons and the dangers that are created because of the capacity to hack, spoof, and create deception within the cyber world. It is now my honor to introduce my friend Tariq Rauf. Tariq was the Director of International Organizations and Non-Proliferation Program at the James Martin Center for Non-Proliferation Studies in Monterey. He was the advisor and non-proliferation expert with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the Department of Foreign Affairs and International Trade of Canada, and the House of Commons Standing Committee on Foreign Affairs and International Trade of the Parliament of Canada. From 2002 to 2011, Mr. Rauf was the head of Verification and Security Policy Coordination, office reporting direct to the Director General of the International Atomic Energy Agency. His responsibilities there included agency-wide policy coordination on IAEA safeguards and verification, including high-priority areas such as North Korea, Egypt, Iran, Iraq, Libya, the Middle East. And he is presently the coordinator of the IAEA's Low Enrichment Uranium Bank, and he is speaking here in his personal capacity.
Thank you very much, Jonathan. It's a pleasure to be here. I will address the middle part of the picture. Frank von Hippel talked about nuclear weapon usable materials, and Executive Secretary Tibor Toth talked about banning nuclear weapon tests. And I will talk about the missing link in the picture of nuclear disarmament, and that is addressing the verification of the dismantlement of nuclear warheads. This is a very large subject, and given the time constraints, I can only touch upon a very small part of this discussion. Nonetheless, I will talk about some of the transparency and confidence-building measures that could possibly be considered in the context of the verification of dismantlement of nuclear warheads. Some 42 years after the entry into force of the Non-Proliferation Treaty, nuclear disarmament leading to a world free of nuclear weapons remains elusive. Can you keep the lights on, please? Thank you. Notable progress, however, has been made in reducing nuclear weapons from the levels prevailing at the height of the Cold War. These reductions have been formally codified in such agreements as the Intermediate and Shorter Range Nuclear Forces Treaty, the Strategic Arms Reduction Treaty START 1 and 2, the Strategic Offensive Reductions Treaty, or the so-called Moscow Treaty, SORT, and the New START Treaty. The Presidential Nuclear Initiatives, or PNIs, announced by Presidents Bush and Gorbachev in September and October 1991, established the respective commitments of the two countries to cease deployment of, and for the most part, elimination of non-strategic nuclear warheads, although there has been no verification of this particular initiative. In addition, France and the United Kingdom also have announced and implemented unilateral reductions in their nuclear forces. All of these negotiated treaties, such as INF, START 1 and 2, and the New START, include verification provisions of delivery vehicles, and the unilateral initiatives of the United Kingdom and France did not include any verification provisions, so one needs to take those at face value. In looking towards the possibility of further reductions in the future, there are several interconnected and fundamental issues that deserve serious attention. Strategic nuclear deliveries were the treaty-limited items in early nuclear arms control agreements, such as the one that I referred to. Later treaties, such as START 1 and 2, SORT and START, address warheads, but only within the framework of counting rules that attribute certain numbers of warheads to each type of delivery vehicle. In some cases, for example, the number of gravity bombs attributed under counting rules to each strategic bomber bear no relation to the real or potential number of weapons that could be carried by such aircraft. For example, some of the strategic bombers could carry up to 20 nuclear warheads, but for counting purposes it would only be one. Another warhead-related issue involves the treaty-limited items under SORT and the new START. The treaty language itself addresses reductions in the aggregate numbers of strategic nuclear warheads, and only operationally deployed strategic nuclear warheads are subject to the treaty limitations. So stored or non-deployed nuclear warheads are outside the purview of these treaties. Such rules and interpretations acknowledge the difficulties of verifying actual numbers of warheads directly, an issue that may become problematic for further reductions in the future. The question is it enough to eliminate strategic nuclear delivery vehicles without addressing the question of what happens to the nuclear warheads themselves? For many non-nuclear weapon states, civil society, and as well as for some nuclear weapon states, this is an essential element in achieving a world free of nuclear weapons. The terms nuclear warhead and nuclear weapon have not been defined with much precision in existing treaties. The NPT restricts the transfer, acquisition of nuclear weapons or other nuclear explosive devices, but offers no definition for this term. Nor do the treaties that prohibit the deployment of nuclear weapons in outer space or on the seabed. In the START 1 treaty, the term warhead was defined simply as a unit of account used for counting, and earlier US-Soviet arms control treaties used the term without definition. The most complete definition of a nuclear warhead or a nuclear explosive device, more correctly, is given in the 1985 South Pacific Nuclear Free Zone Treaty, the Treaty of Rarotonga, and this definition has been reiterated in the 1996 African Nuclear Weapon Free Zone Treaty, the Treaty of Pelindaba, and in the 2006 Central Asian Nuclear Weapon Free Zone Treaty, and this definition states as follows. Nuclear explosive device means any nuclear weapon or other explosive device capable of releasing nuclear energy, irrespective of the purpose for which it could be used. The term includes such a weapon or device in unassembled and partly assembled forms, but does not include the means of transport or delivery of such a weapon or device if separable from and not an indivisible part of it, unquote. This definition, of course, is not entirely satisfactory, inasmuch as capable of releasing nuclear energy remains undefined. But it underscores the importance of understanding at what point a weapon is considered or a warhead is considered dismantled and no longer counted as a nuclear warhead. The agreements reached between the US and the Soviet Union and its successor states have addressed limits on or reductions in the deployment of strategic nuclear delivery vehicles, as I mentioned. Reducing deployed delivery vehicles could be agreed because such items could be tracked well through a combination of national technical means, on-site inspections, and agreed counting rules. In the INF Treaty, for example, treaty-limited delivery vehicles were disposed of according to an elimination protocol that included on-site inspections. Similarly, national technical means combined with cooperative measures and some on-site inspections served for verification of delivery vehicles for elimination and the START and the new START. But again, there is no such elimination requirement for the associated warheads. So the question is, how shall we address warheads in any future move towards deeper reductions in nuclear weapons? Admitting the difficulties of verifying actual numbers of nuclear warheads, it is tempting to sidestep this issue by looking at possible endpoints for nuclear disarmament, such as the disposition of the nuclear materials from dismantled nuclear warheads. This is an issue that Frank von Hippel and the International Panel on Fissile Material have been working on and providing very valuable insights and information as well as data. Nuclear warhead dismantlement refers to the separation of a warhead's high explosives from its nuclear material components. The arrangement of nuclear materials, conventional explosives, and various other non-nuclear parts essential to the detonation of a nuclear warhead is referred to as a physics package. To dismantle a nuclear warhead, the physics package must first be removed from the warhead casing, and its constituent parts can then be separated and the warhead disarmed. Following the completion of these steps, a nuclear warhead could be considered as fully dismantled and ceases to exist for accounting purposes, and then the materials and the components can go into a monitoring and disposition regime. Apparently, the dismantlement process can take anywhere from 1 to 3 weeks, depending on the type of warhead and the availability of technical staff. Now, providing access to nuclear warheads remains a highly sensitive matter for both the United States and the Russian Federation, as well as for the other nuclear weapon states party to the NPT and states that possess nuclear weapons and are not party to any nuclear disarmament agreement. The difficulties of verifying actual numbers of warheads are manifold. They cannot be directly detected or counted via national technical means, partly because of their relatively small size and partly because the deployment is usually on or in launch vehicles that mask their presence. Warheads in storage would also be masked from national technical means, even if they were in principle detectable. On-site inspection measures sufficient to offer reasonable levels of confidence would likely involve unprecedented levels of access to facilities such as launchers and launch sites, storage sites, etc., and only rarely, if ever, open to representatives of foreign governments or to non-nuclear weapon states or even to representatives of civil society. The UK-Norway Warhead Dismantlement Verification Initiative that ran from 2007 to 2010 provided again some useful insights, but it is important to consider whether the modalities that were considered as part of this experiment might be overly onerous, time-consuming, and complex, and whether alternative measures might suffice. Although, as I mentioned, nuclear warheads themselves have not been the subject of agreed direct verification, past and current arms control agreements have provided significant practical experience in the design and implementation of monitoring options for nuclear weapon delivery systems, including their production and storage. In addition, between the Russian Federation and the United States, there have been lab-to-lab programs of joint threat reduction capabilities. Therefore, the point is that the necessary technical tools today are either available or could be in hand with some additional development to support significantly enhanced transparency and monitoring of declared stocks of nuclear warheads at declared sites throughout the life cycle of the weapon system. So, for example, developments in cryptography, now widely used in banking and other commercial transactions, offer a way to exchange in a limited and controlled, but still very useful and meaningful manner, sensitive information about nuclear weapons and warheads that the concerned countries could share amongst themselves. Methods are also available to examine from a short distance the radiation from a nuclear weapon or to interrogate a declared weapon container with an external radiation source. And indeed, such an experiment was carried out in the 1980s by a non-governmental organization, the Natural Resources Defense Council, on a war Soviet warship that did actually measure the radiation from an actual nuclear weapon contained in a missile on that particular ship. In addition, a wide array of tags and seals ranging from barcodes or unique identifiers, tamper indicating tape to electronic chips can be applied to containers and storages for nuclear warheads and be interrogated to check their status. There can be monitored perimeter portal systems which exploit radiation and other distinctive signatures. So again, there is an array of tools which makes it possible to contemplate a set of transparency and monitoring measures that would cover declared stocks of nuclear warheads at sites. This also would require baseline declarations. Baseline declarations, again, are not new. These were required under the Conventional Forces Treaty, under the INF Treaty, under the START Treaty. So again, there are modalities and mechanisms available for providing baseline declarations. These declarations can be updated periodically without allegations of non-compliance because accounting for each and every nuclear warhead produced may be a challenging task. Finally, I might say that some of the less intrusive measures could be declarations of current warhead stocks or of plans for future changes to those stockpiles. These can have value in their own right as confidence-building measures. Such measures could be undertaken unilaterally or through formal agreements. In general, however, tools and measures that provide a higher degree of confidence come at the cost of greater intrusiveness and potential to impact on normal operations, but that is exactly what we need to focus on, is to draw down the arsenals with the view to ending nuclear weapons as a tool of international security policy, as well as to delegitimize the role played by nuclear weapons. Finally, how much verification is necessary is a function both of technical feasibility, i.e. what verification can be done, and of perceptions of necessity that reflect what is politically possible. The latter will in turn be dependent on the character of the international security environment, on the state of relations among the states possessing nuclear weapons, and importantly on the agreed interpretations of the Non-Proliferation Treaty, keeping foremost in mind the goal of achieving a nuclear weapon-free world within our present lifetime. It's also important to recognize that 100% verification is impossible technically, politically, and financially, and that therefore verification should not be approached in the manner of making the good the enemy of the best. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to now open the floor to comments and questions, and don't be hesitant to make an informed comment. You won't be locked into having to ask a crisp question. There's a lot of experts in the room here today.